The morning sun cast long shadows across the endless dunes of the eastern Sahara as Jamal ibn Rashid adjusted his weathered keffiyeh against the rising wind. His dark eyes, creased from decades of desert navigation, studied the horizon with the practiced gaze of one born to these shifting sands. Behind him, the German archaeologist struggled with her heavy equipment pack, her academic enthusiasm evident despite the challenging terrain. Dr. Voss Jamal called in accented English, his voice carrying easily across the morning stillness. "We are close now, but I must speak truth before we continue." Helena Voss paused in her fumbling with the GPS device, looking up at her guide. With curiosity, she had hired Jamal based on recommendations from the university in Cairo, where scholars spoke of his uncanny ability to find sites that others missed. His tribal connections and knowledge of oral traditions had proven invaluable. During their 3-day journey into this remote region, "What troubles you, Jamal?" she asked, noting the serious expression that had replaced his usual patient smile. "Gadeya?" The Bedouin guide gestured toward a cluster of weathered stone pillars that rose from the sand like ancient sentinels. "My grandfather's." Grandfather spoke of this place in whispers. He called it Al-Naaman, Tot al-Ramel, the sleepers beneath the sand. The stories say that those who disturb the old stones wake things that should remain in peaceful slumber. Helena approached the nearest pillar, her archaeological instincts immediately gauging as she noticed intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change in the changing light. The symbols were unlike anything in her extensive database of regional scripts and iconography. They appeared to be simultaneously hieroglyphic and geometric, suggesting a civilization that had developed writing systems far more sophisticated than anything known from this period. "Jamal, these markings are extraordinary," she breathed, pulling out her camera to begin documentation. The craftsmanship suggests advanced metallurgy and stone-cutting techniques that predate known technologies by centuries. As she spoke, the wind began to intensify, carrying with it the distinctive hiss of an approaching sandstorm. The sky darkened as walls of sand raced toward them across the desert, but neither Helena nor Jamal moved to seek shelter. Instead, they watched in amazement as the ancient symbols began to pulse with a faint inner light that seemed to respond to the electrical charge building in the storm-laden air. "By Allah," Jamal whispered, his voice filled with awe and growing apprehension. "The stones remember." The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate with a deep subsonic rhythm that seemed to emanate from far below the surface. Sand cascaded away from hidden joints in the stone pillars, revealing that what they had taken for separate monuments were actually the exposed tops of a much larger structure buried beneath millennia of accumulated sediment. As the sandstorm reached them, instead of the expected chaos and obscured vision, the air around the ancient site remained strangely calm. The swirling winds formed a protective barrier around the stone circle, creating an eye of tranquility. In the desert tempest, within this sanctuary, the symbols continued to pulse with increasing intensity, and hairline cracks began to appear in the sand-covered ground. Dr. Voss Jamal said urgently, backing away from the nearest pillar, "We should leave this place. The ancestors built warnings into our songs for good reason." But Helena was transfixed by what she was witnessing. The cracks in the ground were spreading in geometric patterns that mirrored the symbols on the stones, suggesting that the entire site was responding to some kind of activation sequence. This wasn't just archaeological discovery, it was encountering an active system that had been waiting for the proper conditions to awaken. The sand began to collapse inward, revealing glimpses of polished corridors and chambers that shouldn't exist in the middle of an empty desert. Dr. Helena Voss stood at the edge of the newly revealed chasm, her heart racing with a mixture of scientific excitement and primal fear. The collapsed sand had exposed a perfectly preserved stone staircase that descended into darkness, its steps carved from the same unusual material as the surface pillars. Her archaeological training warred with Jamal's warnings, but intellectual curiosity ultimately won. "I must document this discovery," she told Jamal, who remained several meters back from the opening. "This could rewrite our understanding of pre-dynastic civilizations." Helena activated her headlamp and began her descent. her boots echoing against stone that felt warm despite being buried for millennia. The walls of the passage were covered in the same shifting symbols she had observed above, but here they were more elaborate, forming complex narrative sequences that seemed to tell a story she couldn't yet comprehend. Her portable scanner began registering energy readings that defied explanation. The stone itself was emitting low-level electromagnetic fields, and there were trace elements in the air that suggested advanced atmospheric processing systems were still functioning after thousands of years. The deeper she went, the more convinced she became that this wasn't simply an ancient tomb or temple. The staircase opened into a vast circular chamber. Ceiling disappeared into shadows beyond her light's reach. The walls were lined with crystalline formations that pulsed with the same rhythm she had felt in the ground above. As she approached the nearest crystal cluster, it began to glow more brightly, responding to her presence with what appeared to be recognition protocols. "Impossible," she whispered, pulling out her camera to document formations that looked more technological than geological. The crystals were arranged in patterns that suggested data storage systems, their internal structures far too regular and complex to be natural formations. She was looking at technology that predated known civilizations by millennia. As she moved through the chamber, more crystal arrays activated, creating a cascade of light that revealed the true scope of the underground complex. Corridors branched off in 6 directions, each one lined with the glowing formations. The architecture suggested not just advanced engineering, but a deep understanding of principles that modern science was only beginning to explore. Helena's instruments detected atmospheric compositions that shouldn't exist in an enclosed space. With oxygen levels maintained at optimal ranges despite the chamber being sealed for centuries, whatever civilization had built this place had solved problems of environmental control that challenged contemporary technology. The implications were staggering. She approached what appeared to be a central pedestal topped with the largest crystal formation in the chamber. Unlike the others, this one remained dormant, its faceted surface reflecting her headlamp beam without internal illumination. Symbols carved into its base suggested it was some kind of control interface, though she couldn't determine its function without risking activation. The silence in the chamber was profound, yet Helena sensed she wasn't alone. The crystal arrays continued their rhythmic pulsing, creating patterns of light and shadow that seemed almost communicative. She had the distinct impression that the chamber was observing her, evaluating her presence through sensors that operated beyond her understanding. Her radio crackled with Jamal's voice from above, distorted by the stone and electromagnetic interference. "Doctor, you must return. The storm has passed, but the stones grow restless. The old songs speak of tests that begin when strangers enter the sleeping halls." Helena looked around the chamber one final time before beginning her ascent, knowing that she had discovered something that would challenge everything archaeology thought it knew about human civilization. But as she climbed toward the surface, she couldn't shake the feeling that her brief visit had triggered processes that had been waiting patiently for the right person to arrive. The crystal formations continued pulsing behind her, their rhythm now synchronized in a pattern that suggested the ancient system was fully awakening from its long slumber. Helena's second descent into the chamber came at dawn, equipped with more sophisticated recording devices and a growing conviction that she was dealing with technology rather than religious artifacts. The crystal arrays had remained active through the night, their pulsing visible even from the surface opening. Jamal had reluctantly agreed to stand watch above, though his discomfort with the situation was evident. As she entered the main chamber, Helena immediately noticed changes. The central pedestal crystal was now glowing with soft blue light, and symbols around its base were cycling through sequences that suggested active processing. The air itself felt different, charged with energy that made her skin tingle and her instruments register readings that shouldn't be possible. "Fascinating," she murmured, approaching the pedestal with scientific caution. The activation appears to be progressive, responding to repeated contact or extended presence. The moment her fingers touched the crystal's surface, the chamber transformed. Holographic displays materialized in the air around her, showing complex diagrams and text in a script that seemed to reorganize itself as she watched. More importantly, a figure began to coalesce from the light itself, taking the form of a tall, slender being with features that were recognizably humanoid, but distinctly non-human. "Greetings, seeker of knowledge," the figure spoke, its voice resonating directly in Helena's mind rather than through her ears. "I am Caden, last guardian of the Athari civilization. You have passed the first trials simply by approaching with respect rather than greed." Helena's archaeological training demanded skepticism, but the evidence before her eyes challenged rational explanation. "You're a hologram," she said, more to steady herself than to make an observation. "Some form of preserved consciousness." "I am memory-given form," Caden replied, moving with fluid grace that seemed unbound by physical laws. "When my people chose the Great Sleep, volunteers remained as watchers. Our consciousness preserved in the crystal matrices to guard the knowledge until worthy inheritors arrived." The holographic displays shifted to show images of a magnificent civilization, cities that floated above desert landscapes, technology that worked in harmony with natural forces rather than dominating them. Helena recognized advanced principles of sustainable energy, atmospheric processing, and what appeared to be consciousness transfer technology. "Why did they choose to sleep?" Helena asked, her scientific mind trying to process revelations that challenged fundamental assumptions about technological development. Caden's expression carried profound sadness mixed with ancient wisdom. "We achieved much, perhaps too much. Our technology could reshape worlds, extend life indefinitely, even preserve consciousness beyond physical death. But we learned that unlimited power without unlimited wisdom leads to destruction. Rather than risk becoming conquerors or destroyers, we chose hibernation until the universe produced beings ready to use knowledge responsibly." The tests began immediately. Helena found herself experiencing scenarios that felt completely real. Situations where she was offered power, wealth, and academic recognition in exchange for compromising ethical principles. In one vision, she saw herself using Athari technology to gain personal fame, exploiting archaeological sites for profit. In another, she witnessed the consequences of sharing advanced knowledge with civilizations unprepared for its implications. "Knowledge is not neutral," Caden explained as the visions faded. "Every discovery carries the potential for creation or destruction. The Athari learned this truth through near catastrophe. We created these guardians to ensure that our technological legacy reaches only those who understand responsibility as well as possibility." Helena realized that her months of respectful archaeological practice, her genuine care for preserving rather than exploiting cultural heritage, had been preparing her for evaluation criteria that transcended academic achievement. The tests measured character, not intelligence, seeking individuals who would use advanced knowledge to benefit others rather than accumulate personal power. "The choice is before you," Caden continued, his form becoming more solid as the crystal matrices responded to Helena's demonstrated worthiness. "Accept guardianship of sleeping wisdom, or return to the surface with memories, but no proof. The knowledge we offer could advance your civilization by millennia, but only if it reaches hands prepared to wield it wisely." As Helena considered this unprecedented opportunity, she heard sounds from above that suggested her time for quiet contemplation was ending. Other voices, unfamiliar ones, were calling down into the chamber. Professor Dmitry Volkov's arrival at the site brought complications Helena had hoped to avoid. His voice carried down into the chamber with the commanding tone of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted through authority rather than patience. Behind his words, she could hear the distinctive sounds of military equipment being unpacked and deployed. "Helena." Dmitry called down the stone staircase. "Remarkable discovery, but we need to establish proper security protocols. I've brought a team from the International Archaeological Consortium to ensure this site receives appropriate academic attention." Helena exchanged a meaningful look with Caden, whose holographic form had immediately dimmed upon detecting the new arrivals. "Your colleague approaches with different intentions than your own," the Guardian observed, his voice now reaching her through direct neural interface to avoid detection. The crystal matrices detect minds focused on acquisition rather than understanding. Dmitry Helena called back, climbing partway up the stairs to meet him. "This site requires extremely careful handling. The preservation is unprecedented, but also fragile. Any aggressive investigation techniques could cause irreversible damage. She emerged into daylight to find Volkov accompanied by 6 specialists in military-style gear. Their equipment including electromagnetic scanners, sample, extraction tools, and communication devices that suggested this expedition had significant backing. Jamal stood apart from the group, his expression reflecting deep concern about the transformation of their archaeological survey into what looked like a technological salvage operation. "Helena, my dear colleague," Dmitri said with the patronizing smile she remembered from academic conferences, "your initial documentation is impressive. But this discovery requires resources beyond what individual researchers can provide. The consortium has authorized comprehensive mapping and sample extraction to properly catalog whatever civilization created this complex." "Sample extraction?" Lena repeated, understanding that Dimitri's approach would likely trigger whatever defensive systems the Athari had built into their sanctuary. "We're dealing with active technology here, not inert artifacts. Any aggressive analysis could compromise the entire site." Volkov's expression shifted to barely concealed impatience. "Helena, your romantic notions about archaeological preservation are admirable, but impractical. This site represents potentially revolutionary technological advances. We have a responsibility to extract and study these materials in proper laboratory conditions." As the two teams faced each other in the desert heat, the ground began to vibrate again. The stone pillars started glowing more intensely. New openings appeared in the sand as the ancient complex responded to the perceived threat. Helena realized that the Athari defensive systems were activating. Recognizing the difference between respectful investigation and exploitative extraction from the chamber below, Caden's voice reached her through their neural link. The sleeping ones stir. They sense danger to the preserved knowledge. "You must choose now, Dr. Voss. Accept guardianship and help us protect what should not fall into unprepared hands. Or watch as those who would exploit rather than honor our legacy trigger defenses that will bury these chambers forever." Helena understood that accepting Caden's offer would fundamentally change her life, transforming her from archaeologist to guardian of knowledge that could reshape human civilization. But she also recognized that allowing Volkov's team to proceed would likely result in either the destruction of the site or the misuse of technologies. "To advance for current ethical frameworks, Dmitri," she said firmly, "I cannot allow aggressive extraction procedures at this site. The cultural and scientific value is too great to risk through hasty actions." Volkov's facade of collegial cooperation dropped completely. "Being ridiculous, this site is now under consortium jurisdiction. Can cooperate with proper scientific protocols. Or you can watch from a distance while qualified teams handle the investigation." The confrontation was interrupted by a sound that made everyone freeze, a deep harmonic tone that seemed to come from the earth itself. The stone pillars were resonating in perfect synchronization, creating frequencies that made the air itself vibrate. Sand began flowing away from hidden structures throughout the area, revealing that the site was far larger and more complex than anyone had imagined. Helena felt Caden's presence strengthen. In her mind, as the Guardian systems fully activated, the choice was no longer theoretical. She had to decide immediately whether to become protector of ancient wisdom or witness to its potential destruction. Helena's acceptance of guardianship came as a whispered yes, that seemed to resonate through every crystal in the underground complex. The moment the word left her lips, she felt consciousness expanding beyond individual awareness, connecting with knowledge systems that had waited millennia for someone worthy of their trust. Caden's form solidified completely as the crystal matrices recognized their new protector. Above ground, Amara Hassan had arrived just in time to witness the confrontation between Dr. Voss and Professor Volkov's expedition team. The young Egyptian research assistant had been Helena's most dedicated student, spending months learning archaeological techniques and developing genuine appreciation for cultural preservation. Her timing proved providential as events reached their critical moment. Amara Helena called up from the chamber entrance, her voice carrying new harmonics that reflected her enhanced connection to the Athari systems. "I need you to document what happens here. Future generations must understand both the discovery and the choices made in response to it. Volkov's team had begun setting up extraction equipment despite Helena's objections. Their electromagnetic scanners triggering immediate responses from the site's defensive systems. The stone pillars began emanating force fields that disrupted electronic devices, while sand formations rose from the desert floor to create barriers around the sacred areas. Impossible, one of Volkov's technicians reported, staring at instruments that showed readings beyond their measurement capabilities. The entire site is generating coherent energy fields. It's like the architecture itself is alive. From her position near the chamber entrance, Amara watched in amazement as Helena emerged transformed. Her mentor moved with fluid grace that seemed enhanced by ancient knowledge, and her eyes held depths that reflected connection to consciousness beyond individual human experience. The Guardian integration had been successful, Professor Volkov, Helena said, her voice carrying authority that made the entire expedition team pause. You have a choice. Withdraw your extraction equipment and approach this site with the respect it deserves, or face defenses that were designed to protect knowledge from those who would misuse it. To demonstrate the point, the sandy ground beneath the extraction equipment began to liquefy, causing heavy machinery to sink beyond retrieval. The Ithori defensive systems had awakened fully, recognizing Helena as their authorized guardian and responding to threats against the preserved civilization. Volkov's face flushed with anger and frustration as his expensive equipment disappeared into sand that reformed into solid ground moments later. This is impossible. Ancient civilizations didn't possess technology capable of such precise environmental manipulation. The Ithari achieved harmony between consciousness and natural forces, Helena explained, her enhanced understanding allowing her to translate concepts that had no equivalent in contemporary language. They learned to work with fundamental forces, rather than against them. Their technology was based on cooperation rather than domination. As Volkov's team retreated in confusion and defeat, Amara approached Helena with wonder and growing comprehension. The young woman had spent months observing her mentor's respectful approach to archaeological investigation, unknowingly preparing herself for the revelation that some discoveries carried responsibilities beyond academic documentation. Dr. Voss, Amara said quietly, what happens now? How do we protect this knowledge while ensuring it can benefit humanity when we're ready for it? Helena smiled, recognizing in her student the same ethical foundation that had qualified her for guardianship. The Ithari tradition continues, Amara. Knowledge preserved by those who understand that wisdom must precede power. You've been preparing for this choice since you first chose preservation over profit in your archaeological studies. Caden's holographic form appeared beside them, his ancient features reflecting satisfaction at seeing the Guardian tradition extending to a new generation. The sleeping ones rest peacefully, knowing their legacy remains protected. When your civilization develops the ethical framework necessary to handle such knowledge responsibly, future guardians will ensure a careful transition. As the sun set over the desert, the site settled into its new configuration. The extraction equipment had vanished completely, absorbed by sand that retained no trace of the attempted violation. The stone pillars continued their gentle pulsing, now synchronized with Helena's enhanced awareness and ready to respond to future threats or worthy seekers. Amara began documenting the transformation in her research journal, understanding that she was recording not just archaeological discovery, but the moment when human civilization took its first step toward earning the trust of those who had mastered the balance between knowledge and responsibility. The whispering sands carried away all traces of unwelcome intrusion, leaving only the eternal dance between those who would exploit and those who would protect the deepest mysteries of existence.